In the bedroom, Felix closed the aperture of his lantern completely before sliding aside a curtain and looking outside. He glanced down into a large walled courtyard and he could see over the high walls into the streets beyond. A large gate opened into the courtyard. On the left of the square was a stable and coach house. On the right was a small barracks and privy for the servants. Old oak trees lined the square. There were sentries, tall blonde men in full armour, white wolf pelts draped around their shoulders. One paced from the gatehouse across the courtyard. For a moment, Felix feared that the man might be coming inside, but he soon turned off and headed towards a small barracks next to the stables. Slowly, Felix let the curtain slide back into place, and then he allowed himself to exhale. No, it wouldn't do to get caught here. The White Wolves had a reputation for ferocity that equaled that of the Slayer, and there were at least half a dozen of them out there. The most appropriate thing to do when he found the locked door was to force it. He jimmied it open with the blade of his short sword and went in. He found himself in a place that reminded him of the ledger hall in his father's warehouse back in Altdorf. It was a big room dominated by an oak desk large enough to hold a party on. The walls were lined with filing boxes, hundreds and hundreds of them. He opened one at random and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers written in a precise hand. Glancing through it, he came upon the name of the Countess and notes referring to several of her better-known lovers. There was an extensive section dealing with suspected mutation in her family. Many sources were quoted. What drew Felix's attention were the references to our most special source and our friends down below. He picked up another file and went through it. There were similar notes. One referred to the need for a certain Slazenger to disappear. The files were sorted alphabetically. He couldn't resist it. He sought out the one on the Jaeger family. After finding one concerning a family of bakers on Cake Street who shared the same name, he got his own family file on the second try. Felix felt his stomach lurch when he came across references to the merchant house of Jaeger and Sons. The file remarked on how amenable his brother Otto was and noted that he was a sound man who gave generously to the elector's fund for the maintenance of civil order. As he flipped the page, he saw his own name mentioned. He read on. Thankwall noticed that the secret entrance to von Hallstatt's had been disturbed almost as soon as he entered. There was a strange man scent in the air of the chamber at the foot of the ladder. Several man scents, in fact, and something that smelled like dwarf. Fool, he cursed inside, gnawing at the tip of his tail. The spy master had been discovered. It didn't take the application of a mind as clever as Thankwall's to work out by whom. He had 2 man-things and a dwarf left to kill. Well, the man-things had saved him the bother of tracking them down. Their desire to meddle in business that was not theirs would prove to be their undoing. He nodded to Bone Ripper and chittered his instructions. The ladder groaned under the weight of the rat ogre. It swarmed up the rungs, as agile as an ape. Felix shook his head. He was referred to as a spendthrift younger son who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. There was a line devoted to his duel with Krasner, and a hastily scribbled memo in pencil to the effect that a further investigation should be conducted. Well, perhaps there were worse things to be than the black sheep of the Jaeger family. Perhaps he should show Gotrek. Maybe there was something in the files about the Slayer too. He was just about to look when he heard the door open down below. Damn, he thought, closing the chamber door. He'd have to wait. Von Hallstatt knew he was running late. He hoped the Skaven was too. He deplored giving the wrong impression even to a brute like the Skaven, but Emmanuel was due back tomorrow, and he wanted every little detail of her household to be perfect. He imagined the smile with which she would reward his diligence and knew that all his care had been worthwhile. Even if he had been forced to waste 15 minutes punishing that young footman for his clumsiness in setting the paintings. The flogging had left the magistrate tired and sweaty, and in need of a bath. He picked up a house lantern and lit it. The gloom rushed away from him. Von Hallstatt was going to call a servant to draw some water when he recalled that he had given them all the night off because the Skaven was coming. He would have to forego the pleasure of a wash until later. The Skaven's tidings were more important. Before departing last night, he had intimated that his agents were about to ferret out a particularly important mutant plot. Von Hallstatt had to admit he was far more concerned with the assassination attempt on the sewer jacks. He knew that Hef and Spider were dead. His agents had reported on the fire in Cheap Street. That had been a neat bit of work, disposing of 2 traitors and 100 riffraff at the same time. Come to think of it, perhaps the Ratman had inadvertently provided a solution to another problem. Perhaps he could have fires set across the new quarter. That would certainly cut down on the numbers of mutant-worshipping scum who dwelled there. The thought of burning the dregs of society out of their festering sinkhole of vice warmed the cockles of his heart. He took the stairs 2 at a time and rushed down the corridor to his filing room. But his heart sank when he saw the door had been forced. Anger filled him. Someone had desecrated his sanctum. After Emmanuel, his beloved files were the most important thing in his life. If someone had harmed a page of them... He drew his sword and pushed the door open with his foot. A lantern shone in his face. "Good evening, Von Hallstatt," a cultured voice said. "I think you and I have some business." As the chief magistrate's eyes grew accustomed to the illumination, he recognized the face of the young man he had seen with Otto Jaeger the other night. "Who are you, whelp?" he asked. "My name is Felix Jaeger. I am the man who's going to kill you." Rudy had never seen so much wine before. It was everywhere in the cellar, old bottles covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, newer ones with only the slightest gilding of dirt. There was so much of it, he wondered how any one man could drink it all. Maybe if he had plenty of guests, he supposed. What was that noise? Probably nothing. It would be best to pretend there was nothing there. Ever since they had found the Ratman in the sewers, nothing had gone right. Perhaps he could hide, but there was no place into which he could squeeze his large frame. He should go back to the top of the ladder and take a look. He was sure he had heard the rungs of the metal ladder creak. Yes, he should. He swallowed and tried to make himself move back to the hidden niche. His limbs responded slowly. It was as if all the strength had been drained out of them. His heartbeat sounded loud in his ears. It raced like he had just run a mile. He realized that he had been holding his breath and let it out in a long sigh. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. He wished Gotrek or even that cocky young snob Felix would come back. He didn't like being here on his own, in the basement of a powerful noble's house whose wealth and influence he could hardly imagine. It was ridiculous, he told himself. He spent nearly 15 years, man and boy, in the sewers, hunting mutants and monsters in the dark. He shouldn't be frightened. But it had been different then. He had been younger, and he'd been with friends and comrades. Gant and the brothers, and the others now dead or gone. The last few days had truly shaken him. The solid foundations of his life had vanished. He was alone. No wife, no children. His last friends had vanished or died. And, if young Felix was right, the order that he had sworn to protect, the city's rulers who he was pledged to defend against all enemies, were the enemy. Life didn't make much sense anymore. Wait. There was definitely something moving inside the niche. Something heavy had stealthily pulled itself over the lip of the sinkhole. It was here, in the cellar. "Who's there?" Rudy asked. His voice sounded weak and strange to him. It was the voice of a stranger. The soft, padding footfalls came closer. His lantern revealed the shape as it emerged into the wine cellar. It was huge, a head taller than him and perhaps twice as heavy. Great muscles bulged under its ruddy fur. Long claws slid from the sheaths in its fingertips. Its face was a mixture of rat and wolf. A chilling, malign intelligence burned in its pink, beady little eyes. Rudy raised his club to defend himself, but it was on him with one leap, startlingly swift for so large a creature. Pain flared through Rudy's weapon arm as its great claws bit into the flesh of his wrist. He opened his mouth to scream. He looked up into the pink eyes of death. He felt the breath of the monster on him. It smelled of blood and fresh meat. "Don't be foolish, young man," Fritz von Hallstatt said. As he spoke, he put his hand on the hilt of his longsword. He was confident. He was a formidable swordsman, and his opponent had only a short stabbing blade. "One shout, and I'll have 6 Knights of the Wolf in here. They'll hand me your head." Perhaps they'll be interested in the fact that you can sort with Skaven and keep a ledger of your dealings with them. Felix's words chilled von Hallstatt to the bone. He didn't know whether the Grey Seer was in the house already or about to arrive. He couldn't risk summoning the knights if that was the case. They were reassuringly anti-mutant, but their zeal also extended to dealing with the likes of the Skaven. "You don't know what you're talking about, boy," the magistrate spat. His blade rung as he pulled it from the scabbard. "I'm afraid I do. You see, I saw you in the sewers the other day. I saw you with my own eyes. I nearly didn't believe it when I saw you again in the Golden Hammer." The young man seemed certain. There would be no reasoning with him. He would have to die. Von Hallstatt let his blade point to the floor as he moved closer. He let his shoulders slump in defeat. "How did you know?" "I'm a sewer jack." "You can't be. Sewer jacks don't eat at the Golden Hammer. Not in the company of Otto yet." As he spoke the words, realization dawned on von Hallstatt. Felix Jaeger, Otto Jaeger, the family black sheep. He knew that had been worth looking into. "What do you want, boy? Money? Preferment? I can arrange for either, but it will take time." He edged ever closer. The young man had relaxed a little, seeing how cowed he had become. Soon it would be time to strike. "No, I think I want your head." Even as Felix spoke, von Hallstatt struck, serpent swift. To his surprise, the young man parried his blow. Steel sparked where the blades met. Felix lashed out with his foot, catching von Hallstatt on the shin, pain flaring in his leg. He only just managed to leap back out of the way as the younger man thrust. He knew he had to keep his distance, to use his longer blade to advantage. They circled and wheeled, moving with the precision of masters as they sought out openings. Blades wheeled and glittered in the shadows of the two lanterns. They moved too fast for the eye to follow, dancing with a life of their own, sinking holes in the other's defences. Von Hallstatt allowed himself a snarl of satisfaction as he pinked Jaeger's arm. It turned into a smile as he cut open a nasty gash above the young man's eye. Soon blood would drip down, blinding him. Both breathed hard now, but Fritz von Hallstatt knew that he would win this duel. He could sense it. He would fight defensively for the moment. It was simply a matter of waiting. Thanquol heard the noise upstairs. It sounded like a dance was taking place. Heavy boots slammed into the stone floor. Well, well, he thought. It was fortunate that he had arrived when he did. It would seem that von Hallstatt's enemies had tracked him into this lair and were even now in the process of assassinating him. Assassination had a long and honourable history in Skaven politics, and Thanquol was tempted to let things run their course. It would gratify his sense of petty malice to let the man-thing die. Pleasing though the thought was, he couldn't allow himself the pleasure. It would interfere too much with the great plan. He kicked Bone Ripper. The rat ogre raised its bloody muzzle from the remnants of its meal. It growled at him. Thanquol glared at it, letting his slave feel his will. Slowly, the rat ogre rose. They climbed the stairs out of the cellar towards the battle above. Felix was forced to admit that perhaps this had not been such a good idea after all. He blamed too much watching the plays of Detlef Seac as a youth. He had always wanted to play out one of those melodramatic scenes where the hero confronts the scheming villain. Unfortunately, things weren't quite going according to script. It was the story of his life. His arms burned with fatigue and the pain of the wound von Hallstatt had inflicted. He jerked his head quickly to one side to shake off the blood running down his forehead. A risky move against a swordsman as skilled as his opponent. Red droplets splattered onto the desktop. Felix was relieved that von Hallstatt hadn't quite been swift enough to take advantage of the opening. His breathing was coming swift and laboured. It sounded like a bellows. Pain interfered with the smooth flow of his movements. Von Hallstatt's long blade seemed to be everywhere. It was the sword that made the difference. Felix believed that had the blades been of equal length, he would have been the nobleman's superior. But they were not, and it was killing him. "Hurry, hurry!" Thanquol ordered Bone Ripper as they ran towards the bottom of the stairs. The fight above was still going on, but now that he had decided to save his pawn, he didn't want to take the chance of fate intervening. An accident at this stage would be most annoying. Bone Ripper let out a little moan and stopped so suddenly that Thanquol ran into the solid wall of his back and bounced. The pain in his snout was considerable. The Grey Seer glanced around his pet. He saw why Bone Ripper had halted. A dwarf stood there, blocking the way to the stairs. He was massive, and his fur was strangely crested. In one hand he held an enormous battle axe. He too looked as if he had been racing to get up the steps and intervene in the ongoing fight. He too looked astonished to discover there was another in the house.
"Bloody palaces," he grumbled. "You never know where you'll meet them."
"Die, die, foolish dwarf thing," chittered Thanquol. "Bone Ripper, kill, kill." Bone Ripper surged forward, claws extended. He loomed up over the dwarf. A terrifying demonic apparition, a living tribute to the fearsome imaginations of the sorcerer scientists of Clan Moulder. It would not have surprised Thanquol if the dwarf too was paralysed with fear by the very sight of him, as the others had been.
"Chew on this," the dwarf said.
Brains splattered everywhere as the axe clove Bone Ripper's head in two. Thanquol found himself confronting an irate troll slayer. The musk of fear sprayed as he reached into his pouch for a weapon. Then, deciding discretion was the better part of valour, he turned and scuttled off. To his relief, the dwarf did not follow, but raced up the staircase. Thanquol headed for the sewers, swearing that if it took him a lifetime, he'd make that dwarf pay. Both men heard the noise from below. It sounded like an immense tree had crashed to the ground. Felix saw von Hallstatt's eyes flicker to the window. He knew this would be his only chance. Throwing caution to the wind, he dived straight at the nobleman, all defences down. Momentarily, he expected to feel von Hallstatt's blade bite into his chest. The split second of distraction proved almost enough. Too late, his opponent tried to bring his blade around. Felix was already within the sweep. It bit into his side as his own short sword tore up through von Hallstatt's stomach, under his ribs and into the heart. With a gurgle, the chief magistrate died. Agony seared Felix's brain, and he fell.
"Wake up, manling. This is no time to be lying around."
Felix felt water splash over his face. He coughed and spluttered and shook his head. What the?
"We'd better get out of here before the White Wolves arrive."
Leave me alone. Felix just wanted to lie there. You go and fight them. You always wanted to die heroically. Gotrek shuffled his feet and looked embarrassed.
"I can't, manling. I'm a slayer. I'm supposed to die honourably. If we're caught now, folk might think we're committed burglary."
"So?"
"Theft brings disgrace. I'm trying to atone for my disgrace."
"I could imagine some worse crimes, like drowning a dying man, for instance."
"You're not dying, manling. That's barely a scratch."
"Well, if we must." Felix pulled himself to his feet. He looked around at the files. It occurred to him that the information here would be worth a fortune to the right person. Even a small selection of what was here would be invaluable. The possibilities for blackmail and extortion were endless. He looked at the Slayer and remembered what he had said of theft. Gotrek wouldn't condone him taking the papers. Even if he would, Felix decided he could not take them. It was corrupt. The life work of a maniac like von Hallstatt. Contained in those papers were things that could ruin men's lives. There were too many secrets already in Nuln. These represented too much power to fall into anybody's hands. He took the lanterns and poured their oil over the filing cases. Then he set them alight. Running downstairs with the smell of burning paper filling his nostrils, Felix felt oddly free. He realized that he would not be going to work with Otto after all, and that pleased him tremendously. That was the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Gutter Runners. Needless to say, we could not tell the authorities the whole truth of our encounter with the Skaven, for in doing so we would implicate ourselves in the murder of a high official of the court of Countess Emmanuel, and murder, no matter how deserving the victim, is a capital crime. We were dismissed from service and forced to seek alternative employment. As luck would have it, during a drunken spree in one of the less salubrious quarters of the city, we happened upon a tavern, the owner of which had been a companion of the Slayer in his mercenary days. We were employed to inject undesirables from the bar, and believe me when I tell you that people had to be very undesirable indeed to warrant being thrown out of the Blind Pig. The work was hard, violent and unrewarding, but at least I thought we were safe from the Skaven. Of course, as was so often the case, I was wrong, for it seemed that one of them at least had not forgotten us and was plotting revenge. From My Travels with Gotrek, Volume 3, by Herr Felix Jäger, The Altdorf Press, 2505.